This is a lesson on pronunciation and specifically on variation. So when I talk about variation, I'm talking about how you look at a word and it might have the same letters as a different word, but might be pronounced slightly differently for various reasons. So students need to understand some of the different ways in our mouths that we make those noise and how those differ between words. So let's talk now about variation a little bit. So first, let's talk about sentence level variation. So this sentence, are you going to run today? This is how we would read it out loud from a text. But if you were talking to a friend on the street, you would say, are you gonna run today? So that's an example of sentence level variation where students will want to know not only how to pronounce it differently in different situations, but also how to listen differently. So let's talk about allophonic variation, and an allophone is basically just a letter sound. So let's talk about the letter T and how the letter T sounds very different depending on context. So first is the aspirated T. So if you say to yourself the word Tim, practice saying that to yourself, Tim. Think about where your tongue is and how the air is coming out of your mouth. So in the aspirated T, we use this when we begin a syllable. So students will like to know that. When we begin a syllable, like the word Tim, the T sound is aspirated. So basically that means if you hold your palm out in front of your mouth while you're saying it, you should feel the air hitting your palm, Tim. You should feel air coming out. So let's look at another example of how T varies. So the released T, or the not aspirated T, in the word stem. Say the word stem out loud as you're listening now. Say the word stem. How is that different from the first one? Tim, stem, Tim. You can hear the difference, definitely. So in this T, this form of T happens when it is followed by a vowel, but does not begin a syllable. So we see that here. It's followed by a vowel. There's an E after it, but it does not begin a syllable. The next one, hit. So how is that T different? Hit. Hit. This is what we call the unreleased T, when T is at the end of an utterance or an end of a word. So it's not as strong or aspirated as the T in Tim, but it is slightly stronger than the T in stem. So now let's look at the same word hit with another word after it, hit me. So when I say that, you don't even hear a T sound really, hit me. And that's called a glottal stop, when you're kind of stopping the air in the back of your throat. So students might not have that in their native language. You might need to teach them where in their throat to stop that air coming out. So say to yourself the difference between hit and hit me. And you can feel in the back of your throat that you're stopping the air from coming out. All right, one more, the example of the T in Betty. So say that word out loud to yourself, Betty. This is what we call an alveolar flap. So it's somewhere between a D and a T. It's not Betty and it's not Betty, it's Betty. So that might also be a whole new sound that students will have to learn where in their mouth to form that. All right, let's move on. Let's look at some other variations. So these are different ways that students can choose to pronounce words. So the word tomato, some of you teachers might say tomato. So let's look at these differences. In the word tomato, that's what this first one is, the A sound, tomato. That's the E symbol. So this vowel is a mid, front, spread, tense vowel. That's a lot to think about all at once. So let's go through these individually. So mid vowel, that means the tongue is not high or low in the mouth. Your tongue is right in the middle of your mouth. Front, that means the tongue is at the front of your mouth. And when you say tomato, your tongue moves to the front of your mouth. Spread, that means that the lips are relatively spread apart, but not rounded, just spread. And then finally, tense. This means that the vocal cords, the vocal muscles, are relatively tense as you're saying it. So now practice saying tomato and feel how your lips spread, how your vocal cords tense up. And you can feel each of these aspects as you're saying it. Now the other option is to say tomato, which is also common. So let's look at the differences here. Tomato, the ah sound is low, which means your tongue is low. It's more towards the back of your mouth. It's also back, so it's low and it's back, your tongue. Spread, again, just like the first one, your lips are spread, not rounded, but spread. And then finally, it is a lax vowel, meaning that your vocal muscles are relatively relaxed, unlike the first one where they were more tense. So think about that. Think about other words that you hear every day where the vowels can change depending on who you're talking to or what part of the country or world you might be in. So let's move on to a consonant example for garage. Now I say garage, but some of you might say garage. And you need to be able to hear that difference and explain that difference to your students. So let's look at it. So first, garage. So the J symbol here symbolizes the J sound, the D and G together, garage. So this consonant is voiced, palatal, and affricate. Let's look at what each of those mean. So voiced means that your vocal cords are moving. You have to be moving your vocal cords to make the sound. Palatal. So the primary constriction is between the tongue and the palate, the top of the mouth. So when you say j, you feel the top of your tongue hitting the roof of your mouth. And then finally an affricate. That means you begin with complete closure in the vocal tract and you end with a narrow opening. So practice saying that sound, j, j, and feel how the air is coming out and how your vocal cords are moving. So the other option is the zh that I say, garage, and it's similar to the zh in Dr. Zhivago. We don't usually start words with this sound in English, but in Russian you see that more often. It's also in the word bonjour in French. So let's look at this one. This one is also voiced. You're moving your vocal cords just like the first one. It's also palatal. You're hitting the top palate of your mouth. But it is a fricative rather than affricate. What does that mean? So a fricative is when two articulators, two parts of your mouth, are brought near each other so that the flow of air is impeded, meaning stopped, but not completely blocked. So practice saying these two different pronunciations and think about the air coming out of your mouth. Garage, garage. So practice that to yourself and think about how you will explain that to your students when they ask you about these kinds of pronunciations. Let's talk about a few more examples. So in the word wag, let's look at the w and g sound, wag. So think about these letters. Say this word to yourself, wag. How would you describe these two consonants to your students? W. How do you pronounce the w sound? How do you pronounce the g sound? So you don't need to use these fancy words that we use in linguistics, but you do need to describe where in the mouth a student will need to work on pronunciation. And also the word pay. How is p different from y? And think about the lips. So in the W, the w, your lips are rounded and air is coming out. In the p, your lips have to meet, but then air comes out. Let's look at the word real, because the R sound and the L sound can be very problematic for some students. So the difference here, they are both voiced. So R, you have to use your voice. L, you have to use your voice for that to come out. L. One is palatal, so R is palatal, and L is alveolar. So the tongue hits the roof of your mouth differently. So think about that. Say the word real, and think about where your tongue is. Real. So when you say the L sound, your tongue should be hitting close to your teeth, whereas the R is a little farther back. And also these two words, liter and little, those might sound like the exact same word to many of your students. So for instance, I have a liter here. This is a liter of water. But a student might hear that and think you're saying a little water. because the L sounds so similar to the R to many students. So you need to be able to articulate how to pronounce these differently for students. So as a little test, try saying the word burrito to yourself. Where is your R? Think about where your tongue is with the R, burrito. So a lot of English speakers, their tongue is kind of in a U shape, right? Burrito. But to many Spanish speakers, your R is kind of rolling at the top of your mouth, burrito. So that's another difference in the R's, that we say R's a little differently than many other cultures that roll their tongue on the top of their mouth as they're saying the R. So just another difference to be aware of.